For thousands of years, humans tracked the passing of time by looking up. We watched the sun, the moon, and the stars glide across the sky in a continuous, unbroken sweep. To capture that movement down on Earth, early civilizations built massive stone monuments. Egyptian obelisks cast a sharp shadow along the ground, effectively turning the planet's rotation into a localized solar clock. But the sun eventually sets. To track the hours in the dark, humans replicated that continuous celestial flow with physical materials. They watched water drain from stone clepsydras, sand slip through glass bulbs, and wax melt down the sides of notched candles. Every single one of these early methods suffered from a fatal vulnerability. They were entirely at the mercy of the environment. A cloudy day rendered a sundial useless, and a freezing winter night would turn a water clock into a block of solid ice. Because of this, these early devices didn't actually measure time in strict countable units. They merely mirrored a continuous, unquantifiable natural flow. They told you time was passing, but couldn't give you the exact math of the moment. The breaking point for these natural timekeepers arrived in medieval Europe. Inside the walls of early Christian monasteries, religious life demanded an increasingly rigorous, inflexible daily schedule. Monks were required to wake up and ring the abbey bells for prayer at specific intervals throughout the night. They had to execute this precise routine in total darkness and often in the freezing cold. Shadows couldn't exist without the sun. Candles burned at wildly unpredictable rates, and water clocks froze solid. The elements made accurate, dependable timekeeping impossible. To solve this crisis, humanity had to completely sever its reliance on the rhythm of nature. We needed to build a machine that could generate its own time, completely independent of the weather or the sky. The earliest attempts at mechanical clocks relied on a very simple power source. Engineers tied a heavy stone weight to a rope, wrapped that rope around an axle, and let gravity pull it down to drive a series of interlocking gears. There was just one glaring physics problem. Gravity causes free-falling objects to accelerate. Instead of slowly turning the gears over 24 hours, a weight plunging toward the floor would cause the entire machine to spin wildly out of control and unwind in seconds. The technological breakthrough that solved this acceleration problem is known as the escapement mechanism. By introducing a pivoting pallet above the main wheel, engineers could physically block the rotation of the gears. As the pallet rocks back and forth, it briefly halts the gear, lets one single tooth pass, and then immediately catches the next one. This regulated catch and release motion creates the steady release of energy that we hear as the iconic tick-tock. With the escapement, time was physically quantized. It was converted from a continuous flow into a sequence of discrete, artificial, and perfectly countable beats. While these early weight-driven escapement clocks were a massive leap forward, they were heavily flawed. The oldest surviving examples, like the iron clock at Salisbury Cathedral, were massive, rudimentary machines that functioned well enough to track hours, but failed completely at keeping track of minutes. The first major refinement to this system arrived in the 17th century, thanks to the work of Galileo and Christian Huygens. They integrated the swinging pendulum into the clock's design. Because a pendulum takes the exact same amount of time to swing back and forth, regardless of how wide the swing is, it used gravity to perfectly regulate the escapement's tick. But this created a new environmental hurdle. Pendulums required perfectly stable ground to swing accurately. For sailors trying to calculate their longitude on the open ocean, a pendulum was utterly useless on the rocking deck of a ship. The English clockmaker John Harrison solved this maritime crisis. He spent decades designing a machine that replaced the gravity-dependent pendulum with a high-frequency oscillating balance spring. This mechanism maintained its rhythm regardless of the ship's orientation. By perfecting that artificial tick and insulating it from the motion of the sea, sailors finally had a reliable reference time. They could accurately calculate their exact position, allowing humanity to confidently navigate the entire globe. By the 18th century, the point of reference for time had moved. Humans no longer looked to the solar system to find the hour. They generated it internally, within a box of gears. In fact, mechanical clocks became so precise that the dynamic flipped entirely. Instead of relying on the heavens, machines like the astronomical clock in Prague were built to model and predict the movements of the cosmos. Decoupling time from the sun meant the length of an hour no longer had to stretch or shrink with the changing seasons. Society could now rely on absolute hours that remained perfectly consistent whether it was the middle of summer or the dead of winter. The mechanical clock provided a tool to organize human activity with mathematical precision, moving beyond the simple automation of physical labor. That exact standardized control directly enabled the Industrial Revolution. For the first time, factory labor could be precisely measured, coordinated, and paid out in strict hourly increments. Soon, the rapid expansion of railway networks and global trade necessitated absolute synchronization. Trains couldn't run safely if every town was setting their pocket watches to their own local solar noon. They needed one unified schedule across vast distances. The escapement moved civilization off of the sun's schedule. From the factory floor to the train platform, daily life began to sync with the exact, discrete beat of mechanical gears rather than the shifting patterns of the natural world.